Hi friends, this is my first live stream and let's just start studying. Today I got late from office, so I think it's 10:10 p.m. and I need to finish a lot of syllabus, so let's just get started, Hannah. And it's my first live stream, so I don't know how to edit, I don't know how to speak, I don't know how to show you guys what I'm doing, but I'll get better eventually. So yeah, let's just start and just keep motivating each other, learning and earning. And yeah, this is my first study vlog with Job Live. So thanks. So what I'm studying right now is world history. I'm from India, so I'm studying world history for my examination. And this was the first World War that I finished 2 to 3 days back. Then I had to take a break because uh, something happened which I've written in my last uh, video. You can check that out. But I'm back on studying, and now we're studying Russian Revolution. Okay, okay. Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution. In a previous chapter, you have read about the rise and growth of the socialist movement. By the early years of the 20th century, political movements based on the ideas of socialism had emerged in a number of countries in Europe. With the outbreak of the First World War, however, the socialist movement in most of countries of Europe suffered a setback. The Second International Phase faced a split on the question of attitude to the war and ceased to function. During this period, however, unrest was brewing in Russia. The Russian Revolution took place in 1917, affecting the course of world history for many decades. Conditions in Russia before the Russian Revolution. In the 19th century, almost entire Europe was undergoing important social, economic, and political transformation. Most of the countries were republics like France or constitutional monarchies like England. The rule of the old feudal aristocracy has been replaced had been replaced by that of the new middle classes. Russian Russia, however, was still living in the old world under the autocratic rule of the czars. As the Russian emperor recalled, serfdom had been abolished in 1861, but it did not improve the conditions of the peasant. They still had miserably small holdings of land with no capital to develop even those. For the small holdings they acquired, they had to pay heavy redemption dues for decades. Land hunger of the peasants was a major social factor in the Russian society. Industrialization began very late in Russia. In the second half of the 19th century, the genre developed at a fairly fast rate, but more than half of the capital for investment came from foreign countries. Foreign investors were interested in quick profits and showed no concern for the conditions of workers. Russian capitalists with insufficient capital competed with foreign investors by reducing workers' wages. Whether factories were owned by foreigners or Russians, the condition of workers were horrible. The workers had no political rights and no means of gaining even minor reform. The words of Marx that workers have nothing to lose but their chains rang literally to them. The Russian state under the Tsars was completely unsuited to the needs of the modern time. The Tsar Nicholas II, in whose reign the revolution occurred, still believed in divine rights of king. The divine rights of king. Preservation of absolutism was regarded by him as a sacred duty. The only people who supported the Tsar were the nobility and the upper layer of the clergy. All the rest of the population in the vast Russian Empire was hostile. The bureaucracy that the Tsars had built was top heavy, inflexible, and inefficient. The members being recruited from amongst the privileged classes rather than on the basis of any ability. The Tsars had built a vast empire by conquest of diverse nationalities in Europe and Asia. In these conquered areas, they imposed the use of Russian language and tried to belittle the cultures of the people of these areas. Also, Russian imperialist expansion brought her into the conflict with other imperialist powers. These wars further exposed the hollowness of the Tsars. So, सबसे पहली बात होगी earliest, however, was still Russia, however, was still living in the old world under the autocratic rule of the Tsar, as the Russian emperor were called. Number one, industrialization began very late because this is basically the conditions in Russia before the revolution. Kya tha? That they were living in the old world. Number one. Secondly, they were living in the old world. Number one. Number two was industrialization began very late in Russia in the second half of the 19th century. Then it developed at a very fast rate after that. But most of the capital was from foreign countries, so they did not show any concern for the conditions of workers. Even the Russian capitalists had insufficient capital, so they competed with the foreign investors by reducing the wages. Number two. Okay. Number three is that the Tsar Nicholas II, he believed in the rights of king. The preservation of absolutism was regarded by him as a sacred duty. Number three. Number four, क्या problem हुई? What was the condition in Russia? Is the use of Russian language and try to belittle the cultures of the people of these areas. Number four. उसके बाद हो गया growth of revolutionary movements in Russia. There were many peasant rebellions in Russia before the 19th century, but they were suppressed. Many Russian thinkers had been influenced by the developments in Western Europe and wanted to see similar changes in Russia. Their efforts had helped to bring about the abolition of serfdom. This, however, turned out to be a hollow victory. The hopes of gradual The Tsar had built, okay, the growth of Russian Revolution in Russia. There were many peasant rebellions in Russia before the 19th century, but there were many peasant rebellions in Russia before the 19th century, but they were suppressed. Many Russian thinkers had been influenced by developments in Western Europe and wanted to see similar changes in Russia. Therefore, their efforts had helped to bring about the abolition of serfdom. Okay. This, however, turned out to be a hollow victory. The hopeful hopes of gradual changes in the direction of constitutional democratic government were soon shattered, and every attempt at gradual improvement seemed to end in failure. In the conditions that existed in Russia, even a moderate democratic or reformer had to be a revolutionary. In the last quarter of the 19th century, there was a group known as the Going to the People group. Uh, in the last quarter of the 19th century, there was a movement known as going to the people when intellectuals started preaching their ideas to the peasants. Okay, this is important. During the growth of the revolution, there was abolition of serfdom, but it was a hollow victory. In the last quarter of the 19th century, that is around 1875 and onwards, there was a movement known as the going to the people when intellectuals started preaching their ideas to the peasants. When the workers' organizations were set up after industrialization began, they were dominated by ideas of socialism. Workers' Organization. In 1883, the Russian Social Democratic Party was formed by George Plekhanov. Russian Social Democratic Party. Russian Social Democratic Party by George Plekhanov. Russian Social Democratic Party. George Plekhanov. Russian Social Democratic Party. George Plekhanov, a follower of Marx. This party, along with many other socialist groups, was united into the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. Russian Social Democratic Party was by George Plekhanov, who was a follower of Marx, and this was later a party along with a socialist group was united into Russian Social Democratic Labour Party in 1898. Okay, from 1883 to 1998, in about 16 years. 15 years. However, the party was soon split over question of organization and policy. One group, which was in minority, hence came to be known as Bolsheviks, favored a party of the type that existed in countries like France and Germany and participated in elections to the parliaments of their countries. The majority, known as the Bolsheviks, were convinced that in a country where no democratic rights existed and where there was no parliament, a party organized on parliamentary rights would not be effective. And there's no parliament, therefore parliamentary politics cannot be there. They favored a party of those who would abide by the discipline of the party and work for revolution. The leader of the Bolsheviks was Vladimir Ulyk Ulyanov, popularly known as Lenin. He is regarded as one of the greatest leaders of the socialist movement after Marx and Engels. He devoted himself to the task of organizing the Bolshevik Party as an instrument for bringing about revolution. His name has become inseparable from the revolution of 1970. The Russian socialists, including Plekhanov and Lenin, had played an important part in the Second International. Besides the Bolsheviks and the Bolshevik parties, which were the political parties of the industrial workers, besides the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, which were political parties of industrial workers. Okay, these were for the industrial workers. Uh, there was Socialist Revolutionary Party. This was what party? This was in 1883 Russian Social Democratic Party by George Plekhanov, which later united in 1893 with other parties to give to Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. Then, after that, it was divided into Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. Mensheviks basically belonged to a minority, which was saying that there should be parliamentary politics and the party should indulge in the same. But the Bolsheviks wanted total revolution, and that was why Vladimir Ulyk Ulyanov, as Lenin, known as Lenin. Okay? He's regarded as one of the greatest leaders of the social movement after Marx and Engels. He devoted himself to the task of organizing the Bolshevik Party as an instrument for bringing about revolution. His name has become inseparable from the revolution of 1917. The Russian socialists, including Plekhanov and Lenin, had played an important role in the Second International. Besides the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks parties, which were political parties for industrial workers, there was Socialist Revolutionary Party, which was the demand of peasantry. Socialist Revolutionary Party, peasantry. Socialist Revolutionary Party, peasantry. Socialist Revolutionary Party, peasantry. Okay, Socialist Revolutionary Party, peasantry. Okay, then there were other parties of the non-Russian nationality. Then there were other parties of the non-Russian nationalities. Okay, then there were other parties of the non-Russian nationalities. Uh, of the Russian Empire, which were working to free their land from the colonial oppression. Okay, the revolutionary movement in Russia had been growing when the 1905 revolution broke out. In 1904, a war had broken out between Russia and Japan. The Russian armies had suffered reverses in the war. This had further strengthened the revolutionary movement in Russia. This had further strengthened the revolutionary movement in Russia. On 9 January 1905, a mass of Russian armies had suffered reverses in the war. Russian armies had suffered reverses in the war. Uh, This is further strengthen the revolutionary movement in Russia. On 9 January 1905, a mass of peaceful workers with then what is this? Just a minute, The revolution movement in Russia had been growing when the 1905 revolution went on between Russian on 9 January 1905, a mass of peaceful workers with their wives and children was fired in St. Petersburg while on its way to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar. More than 1,000 of them were killed and thousands of others were wounded. This day is known as the Bloody Sunday. On 9 January 1905, Bloody Sunday. The news of the killings provoked unprecedented disturbances throughout Russia. Even sections of the army and the navy revolted. The sailors of the battleship Potemkin joined the revolutionaries. A new form of organization developed in this revolution, which provided decisive in the upheaval of 1917. This was the Soviet or the Council of Workers Representatives. Soviet or the Council of Workers Representatives. Beginning as committees to conduct strike, they became the instrument of political power. Soviets of peasants were also formed. Okay, okay. This was the Soviet or the Council of Workers Representatives. So with the Council of Workers Representatives, the beginning as committees to conduct strikes, they became the instruments of political power. Soviets of peasants were also formed. In October, the Tsar yielded and announced his manifesto granting freedom of speech, press, and association, and conferred the power to make laws upon an elected body called the Duma. The Tsar's manifesto contained many principles which would have made Russia a constitutional monarchy like England. However, the Tsar soon relapsed into his old ways. No longer could one hope for gradual reform. The 1905 revolution proved to be a dress rehearsal of the revolution that came in 1917. Okay. So basically, there were two, three things which you have to take cognizance of. So, like growth of revolutionary movement. How did it start? Number one, that there were efforts to for the abolition of serfdom. Number two, that the people that the intellectuals went to the people, going to the people. Number three, Russian Social Democratic Party by George Plekhanov in 1983, 1889, 1898. Sorry, Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which was split into Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks basically Vladimir Ulyanov, 1970 revolution. He was a hero of the same. Then Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, they were political parties of the industrial workers. There was a Socialist Revolution Party for the peasantries, and for the free their lands for the colonial oppressors. Okay, had been growing when the 1905 revolution broke out. In 1904, a war had broken out between Russia and Japan. Russia and Japan, the Russian armies had suffered reverses in the war. This had further strengthened the revolutionary movement in Russia. On 9 January 1905, a mass of peaceful protests had come. That was the Bloody Sunday on 9 January 1905. And sailors of battleship Potemkin also joined in. Then the Soviet, that is the Council of Workers' Representatives, was formed. Then all the Soviets of peasants were also formed. And this was for the industrial workers. Okay. Now, in October, what happened was that the Tsar yielded to and announced granting freedom of speech, and giving the power to the electoral body, but he did not do the same. Then it aroused the people and prepared them for revolution. It drew soldiers and the people of non-Russian nationalities into close contact with the Russian revolutionaries, hoping to satisfy his imperial ambitions by annexing Constantinople and the states of Dardanelles. The Tsar took Russia into the First World War. This proved fatal and brought about the final breakdown of the Russian autocracy. Um, Okay, now where were we? In October, this had to be okay. It was the people and prepared them for a revolution. It drew soldiers and the people of non-Russian nationalities into close contact with the Russian revolutionary, hoping to satisfy his imperial ambition by annexing Constantinople and the states of Dardanelles. The Tsar took Russia into the First World War. This proved fatal and brought about the final breakdown of the Russian autocracy. The Tsarist state was incapable of carrying on a modern war. The decadence of the royal family made matters worse. Nicholas II was completely dominated by his wife. She, in turn, was ruled by a fiend named Rasputin, who virtually ran the government. Corruption in the state resulted in the great suffering among the people. There was a shortage of bread. The Russian army suffered heavy reverses. The government was completely unmindful of the conditions of the soldiers on the front. By February 1917, 6 lakh soldiers had been killed in the war. 6 lakh soldiers had been killed in the war. Uh, In 1917, Silla soldiers had been killed in the war. There was widespread discontent throughout the empire as well as in the army. The condition was ripe for a revolution. In setting forth the fundamental law for a successive revolution, Lenin had included two conditions. The people should fully understand that revolution is necessary and number one, and ready to to sacrifice their lives for it. The people should understand that the revolution is necessary and they should be ready to sacrifice their life for it. The existing government should be in a state of crisis now to make it possible for it to be overthrown rapidly, and that time had certainly arrived in Russia in 1917, beginning of the revolution. Minor incidents usually set off revolution. In the case of Russian Revolution, it was a demonstration by working class women trying to purchase bread. A general strike of workers followed, in which soldiers and others soon joined. On 12th March 1917, the capital city of St. Petersburg, renamed Petrograd, later Leningrad, and once again, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, St. Petersburg fell into the hands of the revolutionaries. Soon, the revolutionaries took Moscow. The Tsar gave up his throne, and the first provisional government was formed on 15 March of 1917. The famous poet Mayakovsky expressed the contempt of the Russian people for the Tsar, wrote on the fall of the Tsar, like the chewed stump of a fag, we spat the dynasty out. Fall of the Tsar is known as February Revolution because, according to the old Russian calendar, it occurred on 27 March 1917. The fall of the Tsar, however, marked only the beginning of the revolution. The most important demands of the people were fourfold: peace, land to the tiller, control of industry by workers, and equal status for the non-Russian nationalities. Peace, land to the tiller, peace, land to the tiller, control of industry by the workers, peace, land to the tiller, control of the industry by the workers, peace, land to the tiller, control of the industry by the workers, and equal status to the non-Russian nationalities. Peace, land to the tillers, uh, peace, land to the tillers, control of industry by the workers. Peace, land to the tillers, control of industry by the workers. Peace, land to the tillers, control of industry by the workers, and equal rights and equal status for the non-Russian nationalities. The provisional government, under the leadership of a man named Kerensky, did not implement any of these demands and lost the support of the people. Lenin, who was in exile in Switzerland at the time of the February Revolution, returned to Russia in April. Under his leadership, the Bolshevik Party put forward clear policies to end the war and transfer land to the peasants and advance the slogan "All power to the Soviets." What was Soviet? Soviet was the Council of Workers Representatives. Council of Workers Representatives. Okay. Soviet. On the question of non-Russian nationalities, Bolsheviks were the only party then with a clear policy. Lenin had described the Russian Empire as a prison of nations and had declared that no genuine democracy could be established unless all the non-Russian people were given equal rights. Equal rights. Okay. He had proclaimed the right of the peoples, of all peoples, including those under the Russian Empire, to self-determination. The unpopularity of the Kerensky government led to its collapse on 7 November 1917 when a group of sailors occupied the Winter Palace, the seat of the Kerensky government. Leon Trotsky, who had played an important role in 1905 revolution, returned to Russia in May 1917 as head of the Petrograd Soviet. He was one of the most outstanding leaders of the November uprising. An all-Russia Congress of Soviets met on the same day and assumed full political power. This event, which took place on 7 November, is known as the October Revolution because of the corresponding date of the old Russian calendar, 25th October. Okay, all Russian Congress of Soviets came into being. The Congress of Soviets on the next day issued a proclamation to all peoples and belligerent states to open up negotiations for a just peace without annexation and indemnities. Russia withdrew from the war through formal peace was though formal peace was signed with Germany later after ceding the territories that Germany demanded as a price for peace. Uh, Russia withdrew from the war. The formal peace was signed with Germany later after ceding the territory that Germany demanded as a price for peace. Following the decree on land, the estates of the landlords, the church and the czar were confiscated and transferred to peasant societies to be allotted to peasant families to be cultivated without hired labor. The control of industries was transferred to shop committees of workers. Okay, so the land was taken from the churches and the czar, and it was given to the uh, peasant societies who were distributed to families who would cultivate them without hired labor. The control of industry was given to the shop committees of workers. Shop refer to the transfer to shop committee of workers. Shop committee of workers. By the middle of the 19th century, banks and insurance companies, large industries, mines, water, transport, and railway were nationalized. Foreign debts were repudiated, and foreign investments were confiscated. Foreign investment were confiscated, and foreign debts were repudiated, and foreign investments were confiscated. A declaration of the rights of the people was issued, conferring the right of self-determination upon all nationalities. Declaration of the rights of people conferring the right of self-determination upon all nationalities. A new government called the Council of People's Commissars, headed by Leningrad, was formed. These first acts of the new government were hailed as the beginning of the era of socialism. October Revolution had been almost completely peaceful. Only two persons were reportedly killed in Petrograd on the day of the revolution. However, soon the new state was involved in a civil war. The officers of the army of the fallen Tsar organized an armed rebellion against the Soviet state. The troops of foreign powers, England, France, Japan, Japan, United States, and others joined them. War raged until 1920. By this time, the Red Army of the new state was in control of almost all the lands of all Tsarist empire. The Red Army was badly equipped and composed mainly of workers and peasants. However, it won over better equipped and better trained forces, just as the citizens' armies in the American and French revolutions had won. Consequences of the revolution: the overthrow of autocracy and the destruction of the aristocracy, and the power of the church were the first achievements of the Russian Revolution. The Tsarist Empire was transformed into a new state called the Union of Soviet. What was the what was the meaning of Soviet? Soviet was the Council of Workers Representatives. Soviet was the Council of Workers Representatives. Council of Workers Representatives. Okay. ठीक है. Okay. Was transferred into a new state a Council of Workers Representatives, Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, for short Soviet Union. The policies of the new state were to be directed to the realization of the old socialist ideas from each according to his capacity to each according to his will. Okay, policies of the new states were to be directed to the realization of the old socialist ideas from each according to his capacity to each according to his work. Private property in the means of production was abolished, and the motive of private profit eliminated from the system of production. Economic planning by the state was adopted to build a technologically advanced economy at a fast rate and to eliminate glaring inequalities in society. Work became an essential requirement for every person as there was no unearned income to live on. Okay? Became an essential requirement for every person as there was no unearned income to live on. The right to work became a constitutional right and it became the duty of the state to provide employment to every individual. Education of the entire people was given a high priority. So the right to work हो गया, there was education, then equality of nationalities in the USSR, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Representatives, Union of Soviet Socialist Representatives. What was Soviet? It was Council of Workers Representatives. Soviet was Council of Workers Representatives. And USSR was Union of Soviet Socialist Representatives. Council of Workers Representatives, Union of Soviet Socialist Representatives. Okay. Okay, उसके बाद हो गया basically the equality of all nationalities in the USSR was recognized in the constitution framed in 1924 and later in 1936. The constitution gave the republics formed by the nationalities autonomy to develop their language and cultures. Okay, so what were the four things that the consequences of revolution were? Number one was that there was realization of the old socialist idea from each according to his capacity to each according to his work. Number one. Number two was right to work. Number three was right to education. Number four was equality of all nationalities was recognized by USSR, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Representatives. And what is Soviet? It was the Council of People's Workers Representatives. Okay. Now, the constitution gave the republics from the nationalities autonomy to develop their languages and cultures. Okay, this was the fourth point. These developments were particularly significant for the Asian republics of Union of Soviet Social Representatives, where Soviet meant the Council of Workers Representatives. Okay. Which were much more backward than the European part. Within a few years of the revolution, the Soviet Union emerged as a major power in the world. The social and economic systems that began to be built there was hailed by many as the beginning of a new civilization, while others called it an evil system. After about 70 years of the revolution, the system collapsed, and in 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist as a state. Okay. After about 70 years of the revolution, the system collapsed, and in 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist as a state. The map in this chapter shows the 15 republics which formed the Soviet Union before it broke up. Okay. You will read in the next two chapters about some of the major developments that took place in the Soviet Union and the role that it played in world affairs from the time of its emergence till its collapse. In its impact on the world, the Russian Revolution had a few parallels in history. The idea of socialism, which the socialist movement had been advocating and which the Russian Revolution espoused, were intended for universal application. The Russian Revolution was the first successful revolution in history, which proclaimed the building of a socialist society as its objective. It had led to the creation of a new state over a vast area of the globe. It was therefore bound to have repercussions for the rest of the world. Soon after the revolution, the Communist International, also known as the Third International Comintern, was formed for promoting revolutions on an international scale. The split of the socialist movement at the time of the First World War had been mentioned before. The left-wing sections in many socialist parties now formed themselves into communist parties, and they affiliated themselves to the Comintern. Communist parties were also formed in other countries, often with the active involvement and support of the Comintern. Thus, the international communist movement arose under one organization which decided on policies to be followed by all communist parties. The Soviet Union was considered the leader of the world communist movement, by the communist parties in various countries, and the Communist Party of Soviet Union played a leading role in determining the policies of the Comintern. Okay, the Soviet Union was considered the leader of the world communist movement by the communist parties in various countries, and the Communist Party of Soviet Union played a leading role in determining the policies of the Comintern. Okay. It is generally agreed that Comintern was often used by the Soviet Union as an instrument for pursuing its own objective. However, the formation of communist parties in many countries of the world with the objectives of bringing about revolution and following common policies was a major consequence of the Russian Revolution. With the formation of Comintern, the socialist movement was divided into two sections: socialist and the communist. There were many differences between them on the methods of bringing about socialism and about the concept of socialism itself, the method of bringing socialism and the concept of socialism itself. Despite these differences, socialism became one of the most widely held ideologies within a few decades after its emergence. The spread of the influence of socialist ideas and movement after the First World War was in no small measure due to the success of the revolution. Was in no small measure due to the success of the revolution. Okay. The growing popularity of socialism and many achievements made by the Soviet Union led to a redefinition of democracy. Most people who did not believe in socialism also began to recognize that for democracy to be real, most people who did not believe in socialism also began to recognize that for democracy to be real, political rights without social and economic rights were not enough. Okay. Economic and social affairs could not be left to the capitalists. The idea of the state playing an active role in regulating the economy and planning the economy to improve the conditions of the people was accepted. The biblical idea revived by the socialist movement and the Russian Revolution. He that does not work neither shall he eat. Gained widespread acceptance, adding a new dignity to labor. The popularity of socialism also helped to mitigate discrimination based on race, color, and sex. The spread of socialist ideas also helped in promoting internationalism. The nations, at least in theory, began to accept the idea that the relation with other nations should go farther than merely promoting their narrow self-interest. Many problems which were considered national began to be looked upon as a concern of the world, as concerns of the world as a whole. The universality and internationalism, which were fundamental principles of socialist ideology from the beginning, were totally opposed to imperialism. Russian Revolution served to hasten the idea of imperialism, served to hasten the end of imperialism. End of imperialism. Huh? According to Marx, a nation which enslaves another nation can never be free. Socialists all over the world organize campaigns for putting an end to imperialism. Okay. The new Soviet state came to be looked upon as a friend of the peoples of the colonies struggling for national independence. Russia after the revolution was first country in Europe to openly support the cause of independence of all nations from foreign rule. Immediately after the revolution, the Soviet government had annulled the unequal treaties which the Tsar had imposed on China. It also gave assistance of various kinds to Sun Yat-sen in a struggle for the unification of China. The Russian Revolution also influenced the movements for independence insofar as the latter broadened the objectives of the independence to include social and economic equality through planned economic development. Writing about the Russian Revolution in his autobiography, Jawaharlal Nehru said, "It made me think of politics much more in terms of social change." Okay, so we have read this chapter in about 36 minutes, the whole chapter. So what did we study from this chapter? क्या समझ में आया? What did I understand from this chapter of Russian Revolution? Number one, the conditions in Russia before the revolution. What were the conditions in Russia before the revolution? सबसे बड़ी पहली बात है that Russia was living in the old world order under the autocratic rule of the Tsar, as the Russian emperor was called. They were living in old world order under the autocratic rule of the Tsar, as the Russian emperor was called. Number one. Number two, industrialization began very late in the second half of the 19th century, and it developed fairly fast rate, but more than half of the capital was from foreign countries. Foreign investors were interested in quick profits and showed no concern about the condition of workers. Russian capitalists with insufficient capital competed with foreign investors by reducing workers' wages. They were also not concerned. Number one. Number two. Number three, Tsar Nicholas II, in whose reign the revolution occurred, still believed in divine rights of the king. Number three. Number four, that in the conquered areas, the use of Russian language, they impose the use of Russian language and try to belittle the culture of the people of these areas. Okay, the fourth point was this. Now, growth of revolutionary movement in Russia. Now there were many rebellions, peasant rebellion, industrial workers rebellion. However, the first thing that came into being was the abolition of serfdom. But this, however, came into be a hollow victory. Okay, hollow victory. This was a hollow victory. Number two, there was a movement which was known as going to the people, in which the intellectuals started preaching their ideas to the peasants. See, going to the people, the intellectuals started preaching their ideas to the peasants. Number two. Number three, Russian Social Democratic Party in 1883 by George Plekhanov, and which was then combined with other socialist parties, which were known as Russian Social Democratic Labour Party in 1893. This was the fourth thing that was coming in the growth of revolution movement. Then there was a division between the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party into two divisions. Number one was the Mensheviks, second was the Bolsheviks. Mensheviks was the ones who believed in parliamentary politics and they wanted to fight elections, such as in France and Germany. But the second people who were known as the Bolsheviks, which is the majority, they said under Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov that they said that it is not possible because there is no parliament in itself. So we have to bring out about a revolution. Okay. Now, now what happened was the fifth point over here was that Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, there were also other parties for the peasants, which was a socialist revolutionary party. These two parties were basic. This party, Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, Bolshevik, Menshevik parts, were the industrial workers, and there was other non-Russian nationality parties who wanted basically to free their land from colonial oppression. Number three. Okay, so these were the revolution reasons for the growth of revolution, and then there was a 1904 war that had broken out and between Russia and Japan, in which the Russian Tsar had suffered various reverses, and that gave the strength to the movement, and a mass peaceful protest was taken out by the people to the Winter Palace to give their petition to the Tsar on the 9th January 1905. And what happened was a bloody Sunday, and the sailors of the battleship Potemkin joined the revolutionaries after that. And what was known as the Soviet came into being. Now, what is Soviet? Soviet is known as the Council of Workers' Representatives came into being. After that, what happened was that in October, the Tsar yielded and he gave the freedom of speech, press and association, and the right to confer the power to make laws to the elected body called the Duma, but he went back on his word. He relapsed. So basically, it was a dress rehearsal. The 1905 revolution was a dress rehearsal. Okay, for the 1917 revolution. Now, after that, what happened was Nicholas II, whose wife ruled through a fiend named Rasputin, and he was basically doing corruption and every kind of wrong thing, all the kinds of wrong things. Okay, now what we have in our head is now two conditions were put by Lenin that the fundamental law for a successful revolution. One, that the people should understand fully that revolution is necessary and be ready to sacrifice their lives. Okay, that is the second thing. Beginning of the revolution. Minor incidents took place out of the revolution. Now it was a demonstration of working class women trying to purchase bread. That was a thing that happened in March 1917, but according to the Russian calendar, it is in February 27, so it is known as the February Revolution. Okay. Now there were four things that after the fall of the Tsar that had to be given. Number one, peace. Number two, land to the tiller. Number three, the control of industry to the workers, and number four, the equal status to non-Russian. nationalities. Okay, peace, land to the tiller, control of industry to the workers. The peace, land to the tiller, that is for the peasants. Peace is for everyone. Land to the tiller is for the peasants, and control of the industry by the workers, by the industrial workers. And fourth point is that the equal status for non-Russian nationalities. The provisional government, under the leadership of a man named Kerensky, did not implement any of these. Then who came back from Switzerland? Mr. Vladimir Ulyanov, that is, Lenin came back, and he was participating in Leon Trotsky, and sailors, um, they led to the collapse of the Kerensky government, because so a group of sailors occupied the same. Okay, so this happened, and also the Petrograd Soviet, as head of the Petrograd Soviet, Leon Trotsky, okay, was an outstanding leader, and All Russian Congress of Soviets met on the same day and assumed the full political power on 7th November, that is October Revolution, according to the Russian calendar. Okay, and after that, what happened was, number one, the decree on land was there. Ah, there was decree on the land was there. Okay, so there was a decree on land which was there. Decree on land which was there. Second decree on land which was there. Okay, the estates of landlords, church, and the czar were confiscated and given to peasant societies to be allotted to the peasant family. Number one, control of industry were given transfer to the shop committee. Number two, and by the middle of 1918, banks, insurance companies, large industries, mines, water transport, railways were nationalized. Okay, they were nationalized. Foreign debts were repudiated, and the foreign investment were confiscated. The Declaration of the Rights of People was issued, conferring the right of self-determination of all nationalities. A new government called as the Council of People's Commissars, headed by Lenin, was formed. The October Revolution had been almost completely peaceful. Only 2% died in that particular thing, and then civil war also came into being. War between the Red Army and the people of the old Tsarist rule. Okay, as for the consequences of revolution, number one, that from each according to his capacity to from each according to his capacity to each according to his work. Okay, that was the first thing. Number two, right to work. Number three, right to education. Number four, the equality of all nationalities in the USSR was recognized in the Constitution framed in 1924. Later in 1938 and 1936. The Constitution gave the republic from by the nationality autonomy to develop their language and culture. These developments were practically significant, particularly significant for the Asian republics. Union Soviet of Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, 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 and Soviet is Council of Workers Representative, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. ठीक है Council of Workers Representatives, Soviet Socialist Republics. Okay, and then what happened was, so basically, for me, according to quality, to according to work, number one, right to education, right to work, right to national autonomy, and then the Russian Revolution was the first successful revolution in history which proclaimed the building of a socialist society as its objective. As its objective. The Russian Revolution was the first successful revolution in history which proclaimed the building of a social society. First revolution which proclaimed the building of a social society. The Comintern International, soon after the revolution, the Comintern International, the third Comintern was formed for promoting the revolution on an international scale. Then the left-wing parties came into being in different countries. Okay, and then the spread of socialist ideas also helped in promoting the internationalism. Okay, this was the Russian Revolution that we studied. Now we are coming to the next part, which is known as world from 1919 to the Second World War. 20 years. Karl Liebknecht, Karl Liebknecht, and Rosa Luxemburg. Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg were assassinated in for the German Revolution in 1990. The revolutionary government which came into being was overthrown within a few months. Inspired by the Russian Revolution, there were revolutions in many other countries of Europe, such as Finland and Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, which had earlier been parts of the Russian Empire, but all the revolutions were short-lived. There were movements in other parts of Europe for improvement in living conditions. The political situation in almost every country in Europe was complicated. The period saw the growth of socialist and communist parties in almost every country of Europe. However, within a few years, in many countries of Europe, the socialist movements were defeated and dictatorial governments came to power. However, within a few years, in many countries of Europe, the socialist movement was defeated लिटरल गवर्नमेंट came to power. These government not only suppress social समझ में नहीं आया फिर से पढ़ना पड़ेगा. Two leaders of German revolutionary movement, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, were assassinated. There was an uprising in Hungary, but the revolutionary government which came into power came into being was overthrown within a few months. Okay, inspired by the Russian Revolution, there were revolutions in many other countries of Europe, such as Finland and Baltic Sea, states of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, which had earlier been parts of the Russian Empire. But all these revolutions were shortly. There were movements in other parts of Europe for improvement in living conditions. The political situation in almost every country in Europe was complicated. I think the period saw the growth of socialist and communist parties in almost every country of Europe. However, within a few years, in many countries of Europe, the socialist movements were defeated and dictatorial governments came to power. Okay, however, within a few years, I think there were movements in other parts of the country. However, within a few years, I mean, in many countries of Europe, the socialist movements were defeated and dictatorial governments came to power. And these governments were not suppressed social, were not only suppressed social movement, also destroyed democracy. Suppress social movement, but also destroyed democracy. The American dictatorial governments in Europe in this period had dangerous consequences not only for the peoples of Europe but for the whole world. Most dangerous development was the triumph of fascism in Italy and Germany, which paved the way for the second. Which paved the way for the Second World War, which paved the way for the Second World War, which paved the way for the Second World War. Okay, which paved the way for the Second World War. Fascism Italy. A number of political movements which arose in Europe after the First World War are generally given the name fascist. The common features of these movements were their hostility to democracy and socialism, their hostility to democracy and socialism, and the aim of establishing dictatorship. Their hostility and to democracy and socialism, the hostility and to democracy and socialism, the hostility to democracy and socialism. ठीक है. The common features of these movements were their hostility to democracy and socialism and the aim of establishing dictatorship. They succeeded in many countries of Europe, such as Hungary, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Germany, Spain. Their success in Italy and Germany had the most serious consequences. The term fascism is of Italian origin. It was first used for the movement which started in Italy under the leadership of the Benito Mussolini. ठीक है. The common features of these movements were their hostility to democracy and socialism and the aim of establishing dictatorships. Okay. The common features of these movements were their hostility to democracy and socialism and the aim of establishing dictatorships. The common features of these movements were their hostility to democracy and socialism. Of these movements were the hostility to and the aim of establishing dictatorships. Uh, The succeeded in many countries of Europe, such as Hungary, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Germany, Spain. The success of Italy and Germany had the most serious consequences. The term fascism is of Italian origin. It was first used for the movement which started in Italy under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had organized armed gangs against socialists and communists in 1919. You have read earlier about the unification of Italy under imperialist ambitions. The Italian government had shown little concern for the welfare of the agricultural and industrial workers, whose conditions were miserable in the extreme. It had instead plunged Italy into the First World War in the hope of gaining colonies. About 7 lakh Italians were killed in the war. The conditions of the people had worsened further. The growing strength of the socialist movement in Italy posed a threat to the existing system. Italy had joined the war with the aim of gaining colonies. Italy had joined the war with the aim of gaining colonies. Italy had joined the war with the aim of gaining colonies. However, the peace treaties had failed to satisfy our ambitions. The Italian government at the time was dominated by capitalists and landlords. These sections began to support anti-democratic movements which promised to save them from the danger of socialism as well as to satisfy their colonial aspirations. The movement started by Mussolini was one such movement. His armed gangs were used by landlords and industrialists to organize violence against socialists and communists. A systematic campaign of terrorism and murder was launched, but the government showed little interest in curbing it. In 1921, elections were held in Italy. However, no single party could win a majority and no stable government could be formed. ठीक है? There was one such in 1921 elections were held in Italy. However, no single party could win a majority and no stable government could be formed. ठीक है? In spite of the terror organized by Mussolini's gang, his party could get only 35 35 seats. 35 seats, while the socialists and the communists together won 138 seats. In spite of his poor showing in the election, Mussolini openly talked of seizing power on 20th October 1922. 20th October 1922. ठीक है? When was a bloody Sunday in Russia? 9 January 1905 to 4 19. ठीक है? On January 20, 1922, he organized a march on Rome. The government of Italy did not show any sign of resistance against the volunteers of Mussolini. Now, instead, on 29 October 1920, the King of Italy invited Mussolini to join the government. Thus, without firing a shot, fascists under Mussolini's leadership came to power in Italy. The takeover of the government by fascists was followed by a reign of terror. The socialist movement was suppressed, and many socialist and communist leaders were either killed or jailed or killed. In 1926, all political parties except Mussolini's parties were banned. 1926, all political parties except Mussolini's were banned. The victory of fascism in Italy not only led to the destruction of democracy and the suppression of socialist movements, it also led to the preparation for war. The fascists believed that there could be no harmony between two or more nations. They believed that there could be no harmony between two or more nations. They believed that. They glorified war, which, according to them, ennobled people. They openly advocated a policy of expansion and said that nations which do not expand cannot survive for long. A victory of fascism in Italy was neither the result of victory in elections nor of popular uprising. The government of Italy was handed over to the fascists because the ruling class of Italy considered democracy and socialism as threats to their power. Okay. Then उसके बाद क्या है? Nazism in Italy, in Germany. Within 11 years of the fascist capture of power in Italy, Nazism triumphed in Germany. Nazism, which was the German version of fascism, was much more sinister than the original Italian version. The Nazism under the leadership of Adolf Hitler um, established the most barbarous dictatorship of modern times. You have read earlier about the unification of Germany and certain aspects of Germany's history at the up to the First World War. Germany had sought to satisfy her imperial ambitions through war, but she had suffered defeat. The outbreak of revolution in Germany towards the end of the First World War led to the collapse of the German monarchy. The outbreak of the First World War led to the collapse of German monarchy. However, even though Germany became a republic, the forces behind the monarchy, the big landowners, and the officers of the army remained quite powerful. The government of the German Republic was not able to destroy their power. These forces began to turn to the anti-democratic forces represented by Nazism and to extend their power and to check the power of the socialist movement. Okay, so the term Nazism derived from the name of the party which Hitler founded in 1921. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay, for short, a Nazi party. Like Mussolini, Hitler had also planned to capture power through a march on Berlin. He was arrested and jailed but released long before his term was over. Okay, like Mussolini, Hitler had also planned to capture power through a march on Berlin. Okay, National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party. For the short Nazi party, like Mussolini, Hitler had also planned to capture power through a march on Berlin. He was arrested and jailed, but released long before his term was over. In jail, he wrote his book Mein Kampf, My Struggle, which expressed some of the most monstrous ideas of Nazi movement. He glorified the use of force and brutality and the rule by a great leader and ridiculed internationalism, peace, and democracy. He preached extreme hatred against the German Jews who were blamed not only for the defeat of Germany in the First World War, but for all the ills of Germany. He glorified violent nationalism and extolled war. The dreadful ideas of Nazis found favor with the army, the industrialists, the big landowners, and the anti-republic politicians. They began to look upon Hitler as a savior of Germany. Okay, okay. He also had a march on Berlin, like Mussolini had in Italy, but he was arrested but released long before his term was there in wrote he might struggle. The Nazis capitalized on the sense of humiliation which many Germans felt at the defeat in the war and the unjust provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. They also exploited the miseries of the people which had worsened due to the reparations which Germany was made to pay the Allied powers. They also exploited the misery of the people, which had worsened due to the reparations which Germany was to pay to made to pay to the Allied powers. In 1929 occurred the most serious economic crisis, which affected all the capitalist countries of the world. About this, you will read later. As a result of this crisis, 8 million workers, about half of the working population of Germany, were rendered unemployed. It was during this period that the Nazi Party, which was no more than a conspiratorial group in the beginning, began to spread its influence. The Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party were powerful parties with huge following. ठीक है? Were powerful parties with huge following. uh, these two parties, however, failed to unite against the Nazis. Basically, the fault was of the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party because they failed to unite. The victory of Nazism in Germany, like that of fascism in Italy, was neither the outcome of a popular uprising nor the result of a sham march on Berlin, such as Mussolini's on Rome. In the elections held in Germany before Hitler came to power, the Nazi Party had polled less votes than the Socialist and the Communist votes put together. It had won only 196 seats out of a total of about 650. Hitler's coming to power was a result of political intrigues. In spite of his poor show in the elections, Hitler was appointed the Chancellor of Germany by the President of Germany on 30th January 1933. It was on 1922, 20th January, I think 1922, that Fascism came in Italy. 28th October 1922. Held a march in Germany, a march on Rome, and on 29th October 1922, the King of Italy was invited to the ठीक है ठीक है the dreadful ideas of Nazism found favor with the army, the industrialists, the big landowners, etc. हो गया सारा हो गया and that was on 28th October. Now this is on 30th January 1933. Within a few weeks, the entire fabric of democracy in Germany was shattered. Soon after coming to power, Hitler ordered fresh elections and let loose a reign of terror. Assassination of anti-Nazi leaders was organized on a large scale on 27th February 1933. The 1933 the Reichstag, that is the parliament building, was set on fire by the Nazis. The Communist Party of Germany was blamed for the fire and was suppressed. In spite of the terror organized by the Nazis, the Nazi Party could not win a majority of seats in the parliament. However, Hitler resumed dictatorial powers and in 1934 became the president. Became the president in 1934. Okay, all right. Trade unions were suppressed, and thousands of socialist, communist, and anti-Nazi political leaders were exterminated. Nazis started huge bonfires into which the workers of some of the best writers of Germany into which the works of some of the best writers of Germany and other countries were thrown. Besides socialists and communists, Jews were made victims of an organized campaign of humiliation and violence. Within a few years, they were to be completely exterminated. Simultaneously, a massive program of militarization was launched, and the preparations for war began. The victory of Nazism was a calamity not only for the German people but for the entire Europe and many other parts of the world. It brought in the Second World War. The policies and acts of the fascist governments of Italy and Germany, which ultimately led to the Second World War, are described in another section. Developments in Britain and France. The two major countries of Europe which did not succumb to fascist movements were Britain and France. However, both these countries were faced with serious economic difficulties. Okay. Britain and France, basically, the two major countries in Europe which did not succumb to fascist movements were Britain and France. However, both these countries were faced with serious economic difficulties. In 1924, there were 2 million unemployed persons in Britain. The workers' movement made great advances in 1924. The first Labour Party government came to power. However, it did not remain in power for long. In 1926, occurred the biggest strike in the history of Britain, involving 6 million workers. In the history of Britain, in 1926 occurred the biggest strike in the history of Britain. In 1926 occurred the biggest strike in the history of Britain. Okay, in 1926 occurred the biggest strike in the history of Britain, involving 6 million workers. The strike ultimately failed. A few years later, Britain was badly affected by the worldwide economic crisis, and about 3 million people were unemployed. In 1931, the national government, comprising the Conservative, the Labour, and the Liberal parties, were formed. The government took steps to overcome the serious economic difficulties, though the unemployment situation remained serious. After the victory of fascism in Germany, a fascist movement started in Britain, but it could not make much headway, and Britain continued as a democratic country. Britain continued as a democratic country. The government of France for many years was dominated by big bankers and industrialists. Okay, it hoped that by making use of the resources of German areas, the government of France for many years was dominated by big bankers and industrialists. It hoped that by making use of the resources of the German areas, which had come under her control after the war, it would be able to make France economically strong. However, those hopes were not fulfilled. France could not attain political stability. Also, many governments came and fell. Political instability was made worse as a result of the economic crisis, and corruption became rampant. Okay, fascist movements rose its head, and there was violence in the streets. Ultimately, to meet the threat posed by fascists and other anti-democratic forces, a government comprising radical socialist and communist parties was formed in 1936. Okay, this is known as the Popular Front government, and it lasted for about 2 years. During the period, there was important economic reforms were introduced in France. Okay, the Popular government came into being. Thus, Britain and France succeeded in ये फ्रांस की बात हो गई पहले वो ब्रिटेन की बात थी in Britain it was the national government and here it is a popular government, popular front government, and lasted for about 2 years. During this period, many important economic reforms were introduced in France. Thus, Britain and France succeeded in remaining democratic countries even though they were faced with serious problems. However, the foreign policy of these countries, as you will see later, was not conducive to the maintenance of democracy in other parts of Europe and in preventing the outbreak of war. United States emerges as the strongest power. One of the most important features of the period of the First World War was a decline in the supremacy of Europe in the world and the growing importance of the United States of America. She had in fact emerged as the richest and the most powerful country in the world at the end of the war. This was clear from the important role that she played during the framing of the peace treaties. While the war had severely damaged the economy of the European countries, the economy of USA during this time had in fact become stronger. She had made tremendous industrial progress and was beginning to make heavy investments in Europe. However, in spite of this progress, the United States was frequently beset with serious economic problems. These problems were the result of the capitalist system, which you have read before. The worldwide economic crisis, which began in 1929, had been mentioned before, has been mentioned before. 1929. Okay, the crisis originated in USA. The years after First World War had seen a big increase in the production of goods in America. In spite of this, however, more than half of the population lived at less than the minimum subsistence level. In October 1929, the entire economy began to collapse. The stock market in New York, 1929 की बात करें. Stock market in New York crashed. The fall in the value of shares had created so much panic that in one day 16 million shares were sold in New York Stock Exchange. In some companies, the shares held by people became totally worthless. During the next 4 years, more than 9,000 American banks closed down and millions of people lost their life savings. Okay. The manufacturers and farmers could not get any money to invest, and as people had little money to buy, the goods could not be sold. The manufacturers and farmers could not get any money to invest, and as people had little money to buy, the goods could not be sold. This led to the closing of thousands of factories and throwing of workers out of employment. The purchasing power of the people was thus reduced, which led to closing down of more factories and to unemployment. The depression, as the situation is called, began to spread all to all the capitalist um, countries of Europe in 1931. After the First World War, the economies of the countries of Europe, excluding Russia, had become closely connected with and even interdependent, even dependent on the economies of USA, particularly on the American banks. The consequences of the depression in Europe were similar to those in the USA, and in some cases even worse. The economies of the colonies of the European countries were also affected. Uh, and resulted in large-scale unemployment, loss of production, poverty, and starvation. It continued throughout the 1930s, even though after 1933 the economies of the affected countries began to recover. Okay, they began to recover after 1933. The economy of the affected countries, the crisis of as long as it lasts. May appear is a good number. Long day study right now. Study a lot. I have to study World War II, then World after World War II. Right. So these are huge chapters. This is the timeline from 1919 onwards. Maybe I think. 1919 to Second World War. Now in this period, there were two basically the fastest rules that took place. One was fascism, which started in Italy under Mussolini and his party in around 1922, and the other one was in 1933 when the Chancellor of Germany was Hitler, who was selected by the President of Germany. 1933. Then after this, financial depression came. Okay, I'm a little tired, but I have to study because I have to go to office tomorrow at leave at about 8:30 and reach there by 9:30. Then I'm a little tired. That's me. See. Hi, this is me, and I am a little tired. Actually, I'm very tired today. It was a long day in office, and we came back around 9 o'clock. Then this setting up took me about a month, and we set it up because I was not having the energies to study like even 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So I thought if I'll have you guys and I'll study with you guys, so at least there'll be some. It's like na कि कोई देख रहा है, and that is the basic purpose. Okay, it feels like there's somebody watching you study, and have this time going on up here that it is 125 or 125 minutes, and I've studied like how many pages? There's the Russian Revolution. Not many. It's like 98. 17 pages, 17, 18 pages. So that's not much, but this is what I've studied till now. So yeah, I was not in a position to study 15, 20 minutes even. Now I can. I have studied almost 1.5 hours, and I need to study least at least 3 hours more, maybe even more to finish what I'm doing right now. And because I have office at 8, so I need to be a little smart. But let's see how it goes. Yeah. It may appear surprising that the crisis was caused by overproduction. You have read earlier about how under capitalism, owners of factories and businesses. Okay, where was I? You see, and I'll just tell you. Depression. The depression, as the situation is called, began to spread to all the capitalist. Ouch. Sorry for that. So I'm studying like this, my legs up, I'm tired. It's ideal way to study, but okay. The depression, as the situation is called, began to spread to all the capitalist countries of Europe in 1931. After the First World War, the economies of the countries of Europe, excluding Russia, had become closely connected with and even dependent on the economy of USA, particularly on the American bank. The consequences of the depression in Europe were similar to those in the USA, and in some cases even worse. The economies of the colonies of European countries were also affected. The depression resulted in large-scale unemployment, loss of production, poverty, and starvation. It continued throughout the 1930s, even though after 1933, the economies of the affected countries began to recover. The crisis of as long as it lasted was the most terrible and affected the lives of crores of millions of people all over the world. The estimates of unemployed during this period all over the world vary from between 50 and 100 million people. In USA alone, the richest country in the world, the number of the unemployed exceeded 15 million. Thousands of factories, banks, and business enterprises stopped working. The industrial production fell by about 35% in some countries and by about half. It may appear surprising that the crisis was caused by overproduction. You have read earlier how under capitalism, the owners of the factories and business enterprises try to maximize their profit by producing more goods. When production increases but the purchasing power of the workers remain low, the goods cannot be sold unless their prices are reduced. However, the prices cannot be reduced because this would affect the profits. So the goods remain unsold and the factories are closed to stop for the production. Um, with the closure of factories, people are thrown out of employment, which makes the situation worse as the goods which have been produced cannot be sold. Okay, such crises occurred often in almost every country after the spread of the Industrial Revolution. The crisis of the 1929 to 1933 was, however, the worst in history. In this case, while millions were starving, lakhs of tons of wheat were burned down in some areas to prevent the prices of wheat falling. Millions were starving in one place, and lakhs of tons of wheat were burned down in some areas to prevent the price of wheat from falling. The economic crisis had serious political consequences. You have read how the Nazis in Germany exploited the discontent of the people to promote their anti-democratic programs. In many countries, hunger marches were organized, and the socialist movement. The, in many countries, hunger marches were organized, and the socialist movement pressed for far-reaching changes in the economic system so that such crises would not occur. The only countries which was not affected by the economic crisis of 1929-33 was the Soviet Union. The economic crisis had worst affected the economy of the United States. It led to the victory of the Democratic Party, and Franklin D. Roosevelt became the president of the United States in 1933. Under his 1933 was a year Franklin D. Roosevelt is there, and that is the same year when uh, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. Right? Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. Those same time. I think it was January 1933 when Hitler became 22 January. Under his leadership, a program of economic reconstruction and social welfare was started. The program is known as New Deal. Steps were taken to improve the conditions of workers and to create employment. As a result of the New Deal, the economy of the United States recovered from the crisis and the industrial production picked up again. In 1939, however, there was still 10 million unemployed people in the United States. The United States had retained her position as a mighty power. However, her foreign policy was not very different from that of Britain and France. She, like Britain and France, did not adopt a strong position to resist aggressive acts of fascist power until after the outbreak of the Second World War, when she herself had to enter the war. Okay, okay. Emergence of the Soviet Union. The period after the First World War saw the emergence of the Soviet Union as a major power, and she began to play a crucial role in world affairs. The military intervention in Britain, uh, in Britain, France, USA, and Japan in Russia in support of the counter-revolutionary forces has already been mentioned. In 1920, the counter-revolutionary forces had been defeated and the foreign armies driven out. Russia's participation in the First World War and the long period of civil war and foreign interventions which followed and the revolution had completely shattered the economy of the country. This was a period of acute economic distress for the people. There was a severe shortage of food. The production of industrial goods had far below the pre-war level. To make the distribution of goods equitable in conditions of severe scarcity, certain strong measures were taken. The peasants were made to part with their produce, which was in excess of what was essential for their own. The peasant was made to part with the produce, which was in excess of what was essential for their own. They were not allowed to sell it in the market. The payment of salaries in cash was stopped, and instead people were paid in time, that is, foodstuff and manufacturing goods. These measures had created unrest among the peasants and other sections of society, but were accepted because they were considered essential to defend the revolution. After the Civil War ended, these measures were withdrawn, and in 1921, the new economic policy was introduced. The New Deal was in USA, new economic policy was introduced. Under this policy, the peasants were allowed to sell their produce in the open market. New economic policy, the peasants were allowed to sell the produce in the open market. Payment of wages in the peasants, that is in the agriculture sector. Payment of wages in cash was reintroduced, and production of goods and sale in some industries were under private control was permitted. Okay, payment of wages in cash was reintroduced, so this is for the industry workers, and the production of goods and their sale in some industries under private control was permitted. So a little bit of capitalism came into being. uh, um, okay. A few years later, in 1929, the USSR started its vigorous program of economic reconstruction and industrialization when it adopted the first of a series of its five-year plans. Within a few years, the Soviet Union emerged as a major industrial power. The extraordinary economic progress that the Soviet Union achieved was against heavy odds. Though the foreign intervention had been ended, many countries of Europe and the United States followed a policy of economic boycott with the aim of destroying the revolution. Okay, okay. However, the Soviet Union not only survived but continued to grow economically at a fast rate. She was, as mentioned before, the only country which remained unaffected by the economic crisis of 1929-33. On the contrary, its industrial development went on as before, while millions of people in the West were unemployed, and thousands of factories had come to a standstill. And thousands of factories had come to a standstill. It began to grow. Went on. Okay. Major changes were introduced in agriculture. After the revolution, the estates of the landlords, the church, and the nobility had been confiscated and distributed among the peasants. Okay. Uh, Major changes were introduced in agriculture. After the revolution, the estates of the landlords, the church, and nobility had been confiscated and distributed among the peasants. There were in all about 25 million land holdings, most of which were very small. 25 million land holdings, most of which were very small. 25 million land holdings, most of which were very small. It was considered essential to introduce tractors and other farm machinery. It was thought that this could be done only if the size of the farm was large. Further, the government started its own farms, and besides it adopted the policy of promoting collective farms by bringing small farmers of the peasants, bringing the small farms of the peasants together. In these farms, individual owners of farms by peasants of farms, ownership of farms by peasants was ended, and the peasants worked on these land as collective farms collectively. A collective farm came into being. The government The government pursued the policy of collectivization vigorously, and by 1937, almost all cultivable land was brought under collective farm. Initially, the peasants were free to decide whether they wanted to join the collective farms or not. Later, they were forced to join. The rich peasants who opposed to the collectivization were severely dealt with. The process of collectivization of agriculture was accompanied by many atrocities. According to some estimates, millions of people perished in this period. Thus, while the oppression by landlords had been ended, the introduction of new measures was not without serious problem and oppression. In an industry also, while production of goods to profit of few capitalists had been ended and industrialization of the country took place at a fast rate, and the production of goods of daily necessities was neglected. The main centers of the revolution in 1970 were in Russia. In the following years, the revolution spread to many other parts of the older Russian Empire, and the Bolshevik Party and its supporters formed governments in the areas inhabited by non-Russian nationalities. In 1922, all these territories were formally united in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Um, uh, and after the Council of People's Commissars was there, what is Soviet? It is the Council of Workers Representatives. Council of Workers Representatives is Soviet. Is the Council of Workers Representatives. So Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, for short Soviet Union, which was a federation of many republics at the time, the number of republics constituted in the USSR was five. When a new constitution was adopted in 1936, their number was 11. A few years later, in 1940, their number rose to 15. Okay. After the death of Lenin in 1924, many serious differences arose within the ruling Communist Party, the only political party which existed over policies to be followed. There was also serious struggle for power between different groups and individuals. In this struggle, Stalin emerged victorious in 1927. Trotsky, who had played an important role in the revolution and had organized the Red Army, was expelled from the Communist Party. Oh, Leon Trotsky, oh my God, he was the person who was responsible for the of falling of the Kerensky government, and he in 1997 was expelled from was expelled from the Communist Party in 1927. In 1920, he was sent into exile. In 1930s, almost all the leaders who had played an important role in the revolution and in the following years were eliminated. False charges were brought against them, and after fake trials, they were executed. Political democracy and freedom of speech and press were destroyed. The expression of differences, even within the party, was not tolerated. Stalin, who had been the general secretary of the Communist Party, assumed dictatorial powers which he exercised till his death in 1953. Okay, Stalin, who had been the general secretary of the Communist Party, assumed dictatorial powers which he exercised till his death in 1953. That means almost 23 years. These developments had an adverse effect on the building of socialism in the USSR and introduced features which were contrary to the humanistic ideals of Marxism and of the revolution. The development of art and literature also suffered because of restrictions on freedom. Soviet Union was not recognized by European Union by European powers and USA for a long time. You have read before that she was not allowed to be represented at the peace conference which was held at the end of the First World War, nor in the League of Nations. She remained surrounded by countries which were openly hostile to her. However, with its growing strength, she could not be ignored, and gradually one country after another recognized her. Britain established diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union in 1933. In 1934, she also became a member of the League of Nations. However, in spite of the ending of the isolation of the Soviet Union, the hostility towards the Soviet Union continued. The Soviet Union followed a policy of support to the more movements for independence. The help given to China is notable in this context when the fascist countries started their acts of aggression. Um, the Soviet government pressed for action against them. However, the Western countries did not agree to the Soviet proposals. They continued to regard the Soviet Union as a danger to them and hoped that the fascist countries would destroy her. Their hostility to the Soviet Union led to the appeasement of fascist powers and paved the way for the Second World War. Western countries were more against Soviets and the communists rather than the fascists. That was the basic problem. That Western countries were more against the Soviets and the communists than the fascists, and that was the reason that we went into the Second World War because the fascists grew in power because of the internal conflicts of the Soviets and the Western powers. That was the issue. National movements in Asia and Africa. The period following the First World War saw the strengthening of the movements of the people of Asia and Africa for independence. As stated earlier, many leaders of the freedom movement in Asia and Africa had supported the war effort of the Allies in the hope that their countries could win freedom or at least more rights after war was over. Their hopes had been belied, and the imperialist leaders soon made it clear that the war time slogan of freedom and democracy were not meant for their colonies. However, uh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Now, this is actually a strange situation in the national movement of the taking place in Asia and Africa. Imperialist leaders made it clear that the wartime slogans of freedom and democracy were not meant for the colonies. Freedom and democracy for their own. However, the war had weakened the imperialist country and had contributed to the awakening of the colonial peoples. They struggled for freedom entered a new phase after the war. The support of the Soviets for the right to the strength of the freedom movements. Even though most of the countries of Asia and Africa emerged as independent nations after the Second World War, the period of the First World War saw a serious weakening of imperialism. In India, this was the period when the freedom movement became a massive movement under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. Many countries in Asia made significant advances towards freedom. You have read before that that Iran had been divided into Russian and British spheres of influence before the First World War. The Soviet government, after the revolution of 1917, had given up the sphere under their control and had withdrawn all troops from there. The British, however, tried to extend their influence over the entire country. These efforts were met with a widespread uprising. In 1921, the power was seized by Raza Khan, who in 1925 became the emperor. Raza Khan became the emperor of Iran. The British troops left Iran and modernization of Iran began in 1925 by Raza Khan. Okay. The British government had waged many wars against Afghanistan in the 19th century. As a result of these wars, the independence of Afghanistan had been curbed. The foreign relations of Afghanistan had passed under British control, and in 1990, the king of Afghanistan was assassinated, and his son Amanullah became the king. Amanullah became the king. Okay. Amanullah proclaimed complete independence of Afghanistan, which was immediately recognized by the Soviet Union. British government in India waged a war against the new Afghan government, but in the end, uh, Britain agreed to recognize the independence of Afghanistan. Amanullah government made vigorous efforts to modernize Afghanistan. There was an upsurge in Arab countries against Britain and France. There was an upsurge in Arab countries in Britain and France. There was an upsurge in Arab countries in Britain and France. There was an upsurge in Arab countries against Britain and France. Okay, there was an upsurge in Arab countries against Britain and France. The Arabs had been asked by the Allies. So Amanullah. Oh, it's 12 a.m. Okay. Mhm. I'll just get some water. It's 2 hours. आज ठंड है बहुत. Sorry, I'm sitting like this because I'm actually having a lot of seating time. A little relaxing for me. That's okay. There was an upsurge in nerve control, but once the in absorbed by the alleged was over the other Mustafa Kamal Abdul Razak from the Turkey is the sign. Mm. Oof, little tired. Little. Now time हो गया. How much time? Let's go on. It was 51 minutes. That's not even near to what I can call lot. Yeah. I was studying world history from 1919 to Second World War, as I said. And it started with the study of the build up towards the Second World War and the rise of fascism in Italy by Mussolini in 1922, October 1922, and the rise of National Socialist German Party, that is the Nazi Party in Germany, with Adolf Hitler taking post of the German Chancellor in 1933. In 26 in January, maybe around that. And the reason that fascists and Nazis took over were a little different. There was not a single shot fired when Mussolini walked to Rome and acquired power. In the case of Nazis, Adolf Hitler tried to do the same and he was arrested. But when he went to jail, he was very soon released. And he wrote Mein Kampf there. That is obviously my struggle. Chat his ideas, whatever they may be. And then he was made the German Chancellor because the Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party did not come together. And because of that, he did not have the majority number of seats. But the German president called him up and he was made the German Chancellor. And after that, he won the German Parliament, all the good works, and he destroyed everything in terms of um, democracy or any such idea. Then right now, then there's a lot of things that study in between that the rise of democracy in many countries of Asia and Africa, and like Afghanistan, there was Amanullah Khan. In Iran, there was Raza Khan. Then in Turkey, there was Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who yeah, was responsible for the modernization of Turkey. Then there was growth of Russia, as you all know, for the Russian Revolution. There was immense amount of industrial growth, and then in 1933, as we had studied that the US was very badly hit by um, the depression, the Great Depression, because of high amount of production and the people not having enough amount of money to spend and buy those things. So there was a lot of unemployment, highest amount of unemployment in the world, and there was highest amount of uh, starvation. And on the other hand, there was a lot of burning of um, grains, so that the prices of grains do not come down by the agriculturists or the traders. So this was the, what do you call it, paradox, right? Which was taking place at the, skip to the part that what was the appeasement of the Western countries towards the fascist countries, which were getting aggressive. So the fascist countries of Japan, Italy, and Germany were known as Axis powers, and they had made a anti-Comintern pact that was anti-communist international pact. So they were fighting on the idea that they were trying to finish the communist international, the communism in the world, which they said is dangerous to um, the rule of law in different countries. And because the Western countries wanted to finish off communism, they wanted to finish off Russia, that is, sorry, the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviets, Socialist Republic. So therefore, they went into appeasement of the same. Now, how did this all start? What was going on towards building the Second World War? The first thing was that Japan entered China on the pretext of an issue in the Manchurian railroad project that was going on there, and it took up a lot of it put its own rule on that particular land and even further. And no Western country said anything. And after the First World War, also, if you remember that Japanese had taken over all the German spheres of influence, right? So there the Japanese were there. Then second, Italy took over Ethiopia. Then third was remilitarization of the Saar Valley, I think, towards France, which was not allowed under Treaty of Versailles, but they did not say, even France not say. Then after that, Japan हो गया, Italy and Germany. So fascist powers in Spain, they participated, they funded actually the fascist powers in which country was there? Spain, yeah, right. General Franco. They were backing Mr. General Franco and both um, Germany and Italy were doing that. Right? And after that, what we see is the Munich Pact, something like बहुत दूर है भैया. Actually, I'm feeling a little cold because I'm actually wearing boots, I'm wearing jeans, I'm wearing this packed. Even then, there's a little chill in the air. I don't have a heater in my room because I don't want to, because I go to office every day. I can, it would be difficult to do the same if my body gets acclimatized with the presence of a heater. That is something. Let's push. There's 3 hours are gone by. I'm just talking since 10 minutes. I wasted that. Right. I need to finish this chapter at least. Yeah. Hmm. Let's start. शुरू नहीं करूंगा तो खत्म नहीं होगा. The Munich Pact. While the Spanish Civil War was still going on and Hitler's sorry, where was I? Yeah, right. While the Spanish Civil War was still going on, Hitler's troops marched into Austria in March 1938 and occupied it. Even though this was a violation of the peace treaty signed after the First World War, the Western powers did not protest against it. The final act of appeasement of fascism by the Western world was the Munich Pact. Germany coveted Czechoslovakia, which was very important because of her industry. The area also had strategic importance for the expansion of Germany in the east towards the Soviet Union. Hitler claimed a part of Czechoslovakia, like Sudetenland, which had substantial German population. This area formed about one-fifth of the areas of Czechoslovakia and had one of the largest munition factories. This area formed about one-fifth of the area of Czechoslovakia and had one of the largest munition factories in the world. Instead of meeting the threat posed by Germany, the Prime Minister of Britain and France met Hitler and Mussolini at Munich in Germany on 29 and 30th September 1938 and agreed to Germany's terms without the consent of Czechoslovakia of taking certain land. Soon after, certain land was occupied by the German troops. A few months later, in March 1939, entire Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany. The Munich Pact was the last major act of appeasement by the Western powers. It led Germany to make more demands. The only way the fascist aggression could have been checked and another world war prevented was the alliance of the Western powers with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had been pleading for such an alliance. However, the Western policies of appeasement had convinced the Soviet Union that their main interest was to divert the German expansion towards the Soviet Union. The Munich Pact um, um, was an additional proof to the Soviet Union that the Western powers were trying to appease Germany with a view to direct her aggression against eastward eastward against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union at this time signed a non-aggression pact with Germany in August 1950. The Soviet Union at this time signed a non-aggression pact with Germany in August 1939. In signing of this pact by the Soviet Union shot anti-fascists the world over. In the meantime, Britain and France promised to come to the aid of war and Germany Greece, Romania, and Turkey in case their independence was in danger. The Second World War. The Second World War, like the first, started in Europe and assumed the character of a world war. In spite of the fact that Western countries had acquiesced in all the aggressions of Japan, Italy, and Germany, from the invasion of Manchuria to the annexation of Czechoslovakia, the fascist countries' ambitions had not been satisfied. These countries were planning another redivision of the world, and this had to come into conflict with the established imperialist powers. The Western policy of diverting the aggression of the fascist countries towards the Soviet had failed with the signing of the Western policy of diverting the aggression of the fascist countries. The Western policy of diverting the aggression of the fascist countries towards the Soviet Union failed by the signing of the Soviet Germany non-aggression pact. German non-aggression pact. The war began in Europe between the fascist countries and the major Western Europe, powers, Britain and France. Within a few months, it became a world war as it spread to more and more areas, ultimately involving almost every country in the world. The invasion of Poland. After the First World War, East Prussia had been separated from the rest of Germany. After the First World War, East Prussia had been separated from the rest of Germany. Okay. Now, the city of Danzig, which separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany, had been made a free city independent of German control. Hitler had demanded the return of Danzig to Germany, but Britain had refused to accept this demand. On 1st September 1939, German armies marched into Poland. On 3rd September, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Thus, the invasion of Poland marked the beginning of the Second World War. The German armies completed the conquest of Poland in less than 3 weeks, as no aid reached Poland. In spite of the declaration of war, however, there was little actual fighting for many months. Therefore, the war during this period from September 1939 to April 1940, when Germany invaded Poland by Norway and Denmark, BND, and Denmark, is known as the Phony War. Soon after the German invasion of Poland, the Soviet Union attacked eastern Poland and occupied the territories which were earlier in the Russian Empire. It is believed that this occupation was a part of the secret operations for the Soviet-German non-aggression pact. In 1940, the Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, which had become independent after the First World War, were also occupied by the Soviet Union. They, along with Moldavia, became republics of the USSR. In November 1939, the Soviet Union also went to war against Finland. Okay, Finland. Okay. So Russia wanted East Poland and Baltic Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, this much. ठीक है, फिर phony war, Poland, Norway, Denmark. Okay, Finland. Next, conquest Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, and France. Germany launched her invasion of Norway and Denmark on 9th April 1940. Norway and Denmark. अभी तक क्या क्या हो गया? Poland, Norway, Denmark. Okay. 1940, and within 3 weeks completed the conquest of these two countries. In Norway, the German invasion were held by Quisling. In Norway, the German invaders were held by Quisling, leader of Norway's fascist party. In Norway, the German invaders were held by Quisling, leader of Norway's fascist party. In Norway, the German invaders were held by Quisling, the leader of Norway's fascist parties, helped by okay, who set up a puppet government in Norway under German occupation. The very name Quisling has come to mean a traitor who collaborates with the invaders of this country. In early May began the invasion of Belgium and Holland. In early May began the invasion of Belgium and Holland, um, which was completed by the end of May. Soon the German armies marched into France, and by 14 June 1940, 14 June 1940, the capital city of Paris had fallen into German hands almost without a fight. In the meantime, Italy also had joined the war on the side of her ally Germany on 22nd June 1940. The French government surrendered and signed a truce with Germany, according to which about half of France was occupied by Germany. The remaining part remained under the French government, which was required to disband the French army and provide for the maintenance of the German army in France. The French government, which had surrendered to Germany, ruled from Vichy. The French government, which had surrendered to Germany, ruled from Vichy. With the defeat of France, Germany became the supreme power over the continent of Europe. The war conducted by Germany with great speed and force is known as Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg. which means a lightning bolt. Okay, it was Poland, Norway, where the Quisling was there, Denmark, Belgium, Holland, and after Holland there was France. Hmm. Battle of Britain. Britain was the only major power left in Europe after the fall of France. After the fall of France, Germany thought that Britain would surrender soon as she was without any allies. German Air Force began bombing raids on Britain in August 1940 with the aim of terrorizing her into surrender. The battle that entrusted is known as the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force of Britain played a heroic role in defense against air raids and conducted air raids on German territory in retaliation. The Prime Minister of Britain during the wars was Winston Churchill. Under his leadership, the people of Britain successfully um, resisted the German air raids with courage and determination. In the meantime, Italy had started military operations in North Africa. She also invaded Greece, but the Italian attack in both the areas was repulsed. However, Germany succeeded in capturing the Balkans, Greece, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and also large parts of North Africa. German invasion of Soviet Union, having conquered almost the entire Europe except Britain, Germany attacked the Soviet Union despite the non-aggression pact on 22 June 1941. Okay. As mentioned before, Hitler had always coveted the vast territory and resources of the Soviet Union. He thought that the destruction of the Soviet Union would take about 8 weeks. Hitler had grossly underestimated the strength of the Soviet Union. In the first phase of the war with the Soviet Union, Germany achieved significant victories. Vast areas of the Soviet Union were devastated. Leningrad was besieged and German troops were marching towards Moscow. Okay? In the first phase of the war with the Soviet Union, Germany achieved significant victories. Vast areas of the Soviet Union were devastated. Vast areas of the Soviet Union were devastated. Uh, the first phase of the war with the Soviet Union, Germany achieved significant victories. Vast areas of the Soviet Union were devastated. Leningrad was besieged, and German troops were marching towards Moscow. However, in spite of the initial German successes, the German onslaught was halted. Okay. The first phase of the war with the Soviet Union, Germany achieved significant victories. Vast areas of the Soviet Union were devastated, Leningrad was besieged, and German troops were marching towards Moscow. However, in spite of the initial German successes, the German onslaught was halted. Soviet Union had built up her industrial and military strength. She resisted the German invasion heroically, and German hopes of a quick victory were thwarted. With the German invasion of the Soviet Union, a new vast theater of war had been opened. An important development that followed was the emergence of British Soviet American unity to fight against aggression. Soon after the invasion, Churchill and Roosevelt declared British and American support respectively to the Soviet Union in the war against Germany and promised aid to her. Subsequently, agreements were signed between Soviet Union and Britain and Soviet Union and USA. It was as a result of this unity that Germany, Italy, and Japan were ultimately defeated. Expansion of the war. You have read before about the Japanese invasion of China in 1931. Yes. In 1937, the Japanese had started another invasion of China. Japan was one of the three members of the anti-communist pact, along with Germany and Italy. In September 1940, these three countries had signed another pact which bound them together even more. Japan recognized the leadership of Germany and Italy in the establishment of a new order in Europe, and Japan's leadership was recognized for establishing a new order in Asia. On 7 December 1941, the Japanese, without a declaration of war, conducted a massive raid on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The American Pacific Fleet, which was stationed there, was devastated. The American lost 20 warships and about 250 aircraft. About 3,000 persons were killed. The Americans were completely sorry. Were completely taken away unawares. Negotiations had been going on between the Japanese and the American government to settle their differences in Asia and the Pacific. Attack on The attack on Pearl Harbor in the midst of negotiations showed that the Japanese were determined to conquer Asia and the Pacific. With this, the Second World War became truly global. The United States declared war on Japan on 8 December 1941, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. ये उन्होंने basically declared war on Japan on 8 December 1941. Japan achieved a significant victory. Sorry. The United States declared war on Japan on 8 December 1941, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. Okay. Okay. Following the United States entry into the war, many countries in America joined the war against Germany. Italy and Japan. The Japanese achieved significant victories in the war in Asia. Japanese achieved significant victories in the war in Asia. Within 6 months of the attack on Pearl Harbor, they had conquered Malaya, Burma, now Myanmar, Indonesia, that was under Dutch, the Philippines, that was under the US, Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, numerous other areas. Okay. By the middle of 1942, the fastest powers had reached the peak of their power. After that, the decline began. Okay. So the Battle of Stalingrad in January 1942, the unity of the countries fighting against the Axis power was cemented. Yeah, British declaration. नींद आ रही है, अभी थकान हो रही है, I'm tired, I'm tired. मुझे मुश्किल चलो जी. Focus. I'm a little sleepy, तो बोल के पढ़ता हूँ फिर से, है ना. The second front. Okay. I'm not little sleepy. I'm very sleepy right now. So I need to speak and study, right? I'm very sleepy. I don't know what the time is. Second front. The fastest countries began to suffer. Reverses in other areas also. Japan had failed to capture Australia and Hawaii. In North Africa, the German and Italian troops were routed by early 1943. The destruction of the fastest army in North Africa was also a major turning point in the war. The destruction of the fastest army in North Africa army was also a turning point in the war. In July 1943, Britain and American troops occupied Sicily. British and American troops occupied Sicily. Many sections in Italy had turned against Mussolini, who was arrested and a new government was formed. This government joined the war against Germany. However, German troops invaded northern Italy, and Mussolini, who had escaped with the help of Germans, headed a pro-German government there. And meanwhile, British and American troops entered Italy, and a long battle to throw the Germans out of Italy. The Soviet Union was attaining, and the Soviet Union, which was attaining a significant victories against Germany, and had already entered Czechoslovakia and Romania, which had been under German occupation. On 6 June 1944, more than 1 lakh British and American troops landed on the coast of Normandy in France. On 6 June 1944, by September, their numbers had reached 20 lakh. The opening of this front played a very crucial role in the defeat of Germany. This is known as the opening of the Second Front. Since 1942, in Europe, the most ferocious battle had been fought between Germany and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had been demanding the opening of the Second Front for long, as this would compel Germany to fight on other fronts. I also meant with the sales and the defeat of Germany. From this time onwards, the German armies were on the run on all fronts. End of the war in Europe, the front was opened on. After 6 June 1944, German armies had to face uh, after June 1944, the German armies had to face the forces of the Allies and end of the war in Europe. After the 1941, German army had to forces of the Allies from three directions. In Italy, the British and American troops were advancing northern and western France, and the city of Paris had been freed, and the Allied troops were moving towards Belgium and Holland. On the eastern front, Germans were facing a collapse. The Soviet army from the east and other Allied troops from the west were closing in on Germany. On 2nd May 1945, the Soviet armies entered into Berlin. 2nd May 1945, the Soviet armies went into Berlin, entered Berlin. Hitler had committed suicide on the morning of the same day, 2nd May 1945. On 7th May 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The end of all hostilities in Europe became effective from 12 a.m. on 9th May 1945. Capitulation of Japan. After the defeat of Germany, the war in Asia continued for another 3 months. Britain and USA had launched successful operations against Japan in the Pacific and in the Philippines and Burma. Burma. In spite of serious reverses, however, the Japanese were still holding large parts of China. On 6 August 1945, an atom bomb, the deadliest weapon developed during the war, was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. On 6 August 1945, an atom bomb, the deadliest weapon developed during the war, was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. This was the first time that the atom bomb had been used. With one single bomb, the city of Hiroshima was obliterated. Another atom bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki on 9th August 1945. The city was destroyed. In the meantime, the Soviet Union had declared war on Japan and had started military operations against Japanese forces in Manchuria and Korea. On 14th August 1945, on 14th August 1945, Japan conveyed its acceptance of the Allied demand to surrender, but the actual surrender took place on September 1945, with the Japanese surrender. Resistance movements in all the countries of Europe which had fallen victim to the aggression of fascist countries, the people organized resistance movements. In many countries, the governments capitulated before the aggressors without much fighting, but people of those countries could continue to resist the fascist rules. Fascist rule, for example, when the government of France surrendered, the people of France organized a popular interest. When the government of France surrendered, the people of France organized a popular resistance. Organized a popular resistance. I have to read it again, this first line, because my focus went here, there. In all the countries of Europe which had fallen victim to the aggressions of fascist countries, the people organized this movement. In many countries, government capitulated before the aggressors without much fighting. The people of those countries continued to resist the fascist rule. For example, when the government of France surrendered, the people of France organized a popular resistance movement. गवर्नमेंट ऑफ फ्रांस ने जब सरेंडर करा, the people of France organized a popular resistance movement against the German occupation. The French army was also formed outside France under the leadership of General de Gaulle, which actually actively participated in the war. Similar armies of other countries were also organized. Inside the occupied countries, the resistance movements set up guerrilla forces. Large-scale guerrilla activities were organized in many countries such as Yugoslavia and Greece. Organized in countries such as Yugoslavia and Greece. In many countries, there were large-scale uprisings. The heroic uprising of the Polish people in Warsaw is a glorious chapter in the history of the resistance movements. Um, there were resistance movements within the fascist countries also. There were resistance movements within the fascist countries also. Um, The fascist governments of Italy and Germany had physically exterminated hundreds of thousands of people who were opposed to fascism. However, many anti-fascists from these countries continued to fight against fascism inside and outside their countries. The anti-fascist forces in Italy were very powerful and played an important role in the war against Mussolini. The anti-fascist forces in Italy were very powerful. The anti-fascist forces in Italy were very powerful and played an important role in the war against Mussolini and in fighting against German troops in Italy. In France, Greece, and other in France, Greece, and under the leadership of Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia, the people fought most heroically against fascist rule. In France, Greece, and Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia, the people fought most heroically against fascist rule. The socialists, the communists, and the anti-fascists played a very important part in the resistance movements. Millions of civilian fighters against fascism perished in the war. Millions of civilian fighters against fascism perished in the war. The people in countries which were victims of aggression fought back valiantly. In Asia, the people of China had to bear the brunt of Japanese aggression from the early 1930s. The civil war had broken out in China between communists and Kuomintang in the early 1920s. The civil war that had broken Seven. Started at 296, 337. Exactly 40 minutes. तो ये भी तब तक करना था हुआ नहीं कर जाएगा. So I don't know how to do this, but thank you guys. Thank you everyone. Um, who will watch in the future also. So at least it pushed me to a level that I studied it from I think almost 3.5 hours maybe. That is the length of the video. You have to connect with more of you people in the future. You know. Yes, this is the first face reveal and so thank you so much. And have a nice night. Good night.